I've always been fascinated by her. Jane, with her beautiful long brown hair and kind smile. For over a year now, I've watched her from afar, learning her routines, her likes and dislikes. I feel like I know her better than anyone. Some may call me obsessed, but I prefer to think of it as deep admiration. Last night was when I finally worked up the courage to take things further. As the clock neared midnight, I slip into the small woods that border her property. The moon provided just enough light to see my way through the trees without flashlights that could draw unwanted attention. My heart pounded in my chest the closer I got to the house. When I reached the edge of the woods, I paused to peer through the brush. There in the living room, lit only by the flickering television, was Jane, curled up on the couch under a blanket. How I longed in that moment just to go to her, to feel the warmth of her skin and stroke her hair. But not yet. It was too soon. I had to earn her trust first before making my presence known. And so I watched, committing every small detail to memory. The way she idly scrolled on her phone, the smile that occasionally touched her lips at something amusing. How peaceful and beautiful she looked, lost in her own little world, unaware of the eyes upon her. My feelings grew stronger with each passing minute, the adoration and need to be near her simmering just beneath the surface. When at last she rose to flick off the lights and head to bed, my own disappointment at our time together ending was profound, but I took comfort that it would not be long now until she was truly mine, all mine. The next night and the next, I returned to my hiding place to watch over her as she went about her evening routine. A protectiveness came with my growing affection, a fierce instinct to keep her safe from any perceived threats. If only she knew there was someone watching out for her, someone who cared so deeply. Maybe then she would understand. It was on the fourth night that things began to change. As I crouched in the trees, catching glimpses of her through the windows, movement in the side lawn drew my attention. A figure was emerging from the darkness, tall and barely visible, creeping ever closer to the house. Instant panic seized me. Who was this, and what did they want with Jane? Without thinking, I burst from the woods, a guttural sound tearing from my throat as I charged the stranger. They spun in alarm at my attack, but it was too late. My hands found their neck, squeezing as hot fury coursed through my veins. How dare they come here? How dare they come here? How dare they threaten what was mine? Again and again, I slammed their head against the ground as they choked and scrambled feebly beneath me. When at last they moved no more, I sat back on my heels, panting. Only then did the enormity of what I had done fully register. What have I become? I glanced up at the house, half expecting to see Jane alerted by the commotion, but all was still. A plan formed rapidly in my mind. If she finds the body, she'll be terrified. She'll need someone to protect her. Someone who truly cares. And so I dragged the corpse into the woods, obscuring as much evidence as the darkness allowed. My heart was racing, but also strangely calm. A cold clarity having taken hold. Jane would be mine, and I would keep her safe, no matter the cost. Nobody will ever hurt or take her from me again. She just doesn't know it yet, but soon, oh so very soon. It was shaping up to be just another ordinary Saturday at the grocery store where I worked. As the noon sun rose high in the sky, bustling crowds of shoppers flooded through the automatic doors for their weekend shopping. I grabbed my scanner gun and apron, readying myself for the rush. My job was to help customers find items and stock depleted shelves. I enjoyed staying busy and chatting with regulars as I worked. Mr. Johnson waved when I passed down aisle 2, restocking cans of soup. "Busy day, eh, Sarah?" He chuckled. I smiled and nodded, pleased to see his friendly face as always. Things seemed normal enough so far. A few hours passed in a blur of activity. I ran back and forth across the store, answering questions and hauling boxes. By late afternoon, the hordes had finally begun to thin out some. I leaned against the shelves in aisle 3, taking a moment to catch my breath. That's when I first heard it. a faint whimpering sound coming from somewhere nearby. I peered around the corner, unsure of what I might find. Huddled in the corner behind a pile of toilet paper was a tiny figure curled into a ball. As I stepped closer, I realized with a start it was a young boy, no more than 5 years old, sobbing quietly into his knees. "Hey there, it's okay," I said softly as not to further frighten him. "Where are your parents, sweetie?" He raised his tear-streaked face to look at me with wide, frightened eyes. "I don't know," he hiccuped between sobs. We were looking at snacks, and then I turned around and they were gone. My heart broke for the poor lost child. I bent down and gently rubbed his shoulder, trying my best to soothe him. "Don't worry, we'll find them. My name's Sarah. What's yours?" "Charlie," he stammered. I smiled warmly and took his tiny hand in mine. "Well, Charlie, let's go to customer service and have them make an announcement to call for your mom and dad, okay?" He nodded timidly, allowing me to lead him up front. I explained the situation to my manager, who quickly grabbed the pass system. "Attention shoppers, we have a lost child, Charlie, in customer service. Please come identify yourself as his parents." We waited anxiously for several minutes, but no one came forward. The police were then called to help with locating his family. Charlie had begun crying again, afraid now that he may never see his mommy and daddy. I felt my own worry growing. What kind of parents could so carelessly lose track of their child for this long in such a crowded store? Something didn't feel right about this situation at all. After what seemed like forever, 2 officers arrived and asked Charlie some questions gently. But even with their prompting, he couldn't recall many details about what his parents looked like or what they were wearing. My manager started combing through security footage for any sign of the family. The police officer shook his head gravely. "This is definitely suspicious. I'm afraid the parents may not have just lost him accidentally like he thinks. We need to run some checks on possible abductions matching this description." Just then, my manager gasped from his monitor. "I think I found them, but it doesn't look good." We all hurried over, heartbeat rising in dread of what we might see. Sure enough, there on screen was Charlie walking down aisle 3 hand in hand with a young couple. But about 10 minutes later, a man I can only describe as sketchy started talking to the woman. She nodded stiffly, and the next thing we saw was Charlie being pulled one way, crying out for his parents as they walked calmly in the opposite direction and right out the front exit without looking back. The blood ran cold in my veins. This poor, sweet boy had been intentionally left behind by people who clearly meant him harm. The officers thanked us for our help and said they were putting out an Amber Alert and search right away. I gave Charlie a warm hug goodbye, trying to be brave, though inside I felt sick to my stomach. Who knows what could be happening to him at that very moment with those monsters? I prayed he would be found safe and sound. In the following days, the story of little Charlie's disappearance spread like wildfire through the community. Store employees were interviewed, footage was shared widely, and everyone kept their eyes peeled for any sign of the criminals or the boy. Then, a week later, the miracle we'd all been hoping and praying for. Charlie was found unharmed by a neighbor a few towns over. He had managed to escape from the couple's vehicle at a gas station. After being medically cleared, Charlie and his grateful family held a press conference. Through his tears, he described how the scary people had driven him far away while yelling angrily and demanding money. They kept him locked in a dark room for days, with barely any food or water. Somehow the brave boy found an opportunity to unlock the car door and run for help. His abductors were later arrested, and the whole ordeal served as a chilling reminder of the evils that can lurk within seemingly ordinary public places. I was just thankful Charlie's life had been spared from their despicable scheme, and that we had all played a role in bringing him back safely home where he belonged. It's a day I'll never forget for as long as I live. As the sun began to set over the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor, I started to feel that familiar sense of unease creeping up my spine. I didn't want to be out here alone in these woods after dark, but I had no choice. I had to get home. My car had broken down a few miles back on the lonely dirt road. and my phone had no signal this far out. So walking was my only option. I picked up my pace as the shadows deepened around me. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf made me jump. My heart pounded in my chest as I hurried down the winding forest path. All I could think about was getting home safely before night fell completely. Then suddenly, through the gathering gloom, I spotted something up ahead through the trees. A faint orange glow between the trunks. Light meant people, and people meant help. Hope surged through me, and I rushed towards the glow, desperate to reach the warm safety of a home before the darkness closed in. Breaking through the trees, I found myself in a small clearing. In the center stood an old wooden farmhouse, weathered gray boards barely visible in the fading light. A single window on the ground floor still shone that welcoming orange glow. I hurried across the overgrown yard and pounded on the heavy front door, craning my neck to peer inside the window, hoping to glimpse whoever lived here. For several long moments, nothing happened. No movement, no sound from within. Fear gripped me again. What if this house was abandoned? What if I was not alone out here in the dark? I raised my hand to knock again when suddenly the door creaked open. A wrinkled face peered out at me, gray eyes blinking in surprise from beneath bushy eyebrows. "Can I help you, boy?" the old man rasped. I quickly explained my situation about my broken-down car, the coming nightfall, and my desperate need for a phone. He grunted and stood aside to let me enter. "Come on in then. Phone's in the kitchen. Name's Jacob." I thanked him profusely and hurried inside, eager to be off this lonely path before the night consumed it completely. The inside of the farmhouse was just as worn and weathered as the outside. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled musty, as if this place had been shut away from the world for decades. Jacob guided me down a narrow hallway, the wooden floors creaking under our feet. We passed closed doors that could hide anything behind them in the gloomy half-light. Finally, we reached the kitchen, illuminated by a single flickering bulb. An old rotary phone sat on the table amid a clutter of papers and empty cans. I snatched it up and dialed 911 with shaking fingers, relieved when the operator answered. Soon headlights appeared out the grimy windows as a police car pulled into the drive, come to give me a lift back to civilization. My ordeal was over. I turned to thank Jacob for his hospitality in this place, only to find he had vanished. "Jacob," I called into the dim hallway, my voice echoing in the silence. No answer came. Unease prickled over my skin once more. Who was this strange hermit living cut off from the world deep in these woods? What secrets did this decaying house hold after so many years alone? I hurried outside to meet the waiting officers, eager to put this unsettling place behind me. But as their headlights swept away into the night, taking me with them, I couldn't help glancing back at that solitary light still shining in the abandoned farmhouse window and wondering what else lurked in the shadows of those endless dark woods. Weeks passed, and I tried to put the strange encounter from my mind. But then one night, I woke with a start from a deep sleep, heart pounding as vivid images from a nightmare faded. I had been wandering lost in those woods again, chasing flickering lights through the trees, when I stumbled into that clearing and found not an old farmhouse waiting for me, but a crumbling ruin, windows staring like blind eyes. And from within had come a low moan, a sound no living thing should make. Shivering, I pulled the blankets tighter around me and lay awake, unable to shake the feeling of being watched from the darkness at my window. Eventually, sleep claimed me once more, but the dreams did not stop. Night after night, I found myself back in that forest, always drawn towards the ruins at its heart, no matter how I tried to flee. And each night, the things that peered out at me from between the rotting boards grew more twisted and terrible. I woke exhausted, dark circles forming under my eyes, as rest continued to elude me. My family began to worry as I grew pale and withdrawn, losing weight from lack of sleep and poor appetite. Nothing they tried, relaxation techniques, herbal remedies, even seeing a doctor, gave me any relief. Then one night, I woke with a choked gasp, clawing my way up from the depths of sleep. But this time was different. I was not alone. A shadowed figure stood at the foot of my bed, barely visible in the darkness, but I could feel its eyes upon me. My heart stopped in fear. Then it spoke. The dry rasp sending chills down my spine. "It's time to face your fears, boy. Come back with me now. The others are waiting." Its gnarled hand reached for me, and I shriek, flinging myself back against the headboard as far from that thing as I could get. My scream brought my parents running, lights flickering on to reveal nothing. The room was empty. Had it all been another nightmare? But this had felt too real. The next morning, I told my parents what had happened. To my surprise, they did not dismiss me as delirious from lack of sleep this time. Instead, worry etched their faces as they shared a strange story of their own. They too had begun having unsettling dreams of that old farmhouse deep in the woods. Dreams where voices called to them from the ruins, urging them ever closer. My father remembered then, years ago. Before we moved here, he had heard local legends of that place and the family who once lived there. How they disappeared without a trace one winter, and how some swore they still heard cries for help on the wind through the bare trees, long after the farmhouse fell empty and into ruin. A horrible suspicion began to form in my mind. That night, I told my parents I was returning to the forest, that I needed to face what was calling to me from the ruins, and put an end to these nightmares once and for all. They pleaded with me not to go, but I was determined. At dusk, I packed a backpack with supplies and a flashlight and started down the long, empty road towards the tree line as twilight deepened around me. The forest had never seemed so vast or oppressive as it swallowed me into its grim embrace once more. My flashlight only cut a small circle through the thick trunks pressing in on all sides. Every snap of brittle branches underfoot made me jump, ears straining for any other sound carrying through the gloom. Time seemed to slow as I trudged ever deeper, following an inexplicable pull towards my destination. Finally, I saw the glow of my light reflecting off windows ahead and emerge into a clearing that made my blood run cold. Before me stood not an old farmhouse, but a crumbling ruin long reclaimed by nature. Broken walls tilted at sickening angles, windows shattered or missing entirely like missing teeth in a skull's grin. Worst of all was the unnatural stillness and sense that I was being watched from every shadowy corner. Swallowing my fear, I approached one of the sagging doors and peered inside. My light revealed only more decay, but from the darkness at its edges came a rustling like bone on bone, and a hollow moan that raised the hairs on my neck. I stumbled backward with a cry, tripping over gnarled tree roots and landing hard in the dirt. As I struggled to my feet and whirled around, my light fell upon a stone barely legible beneath creeping vines, a weathered grave marker, and on it a name almost worn away by time, Jacob. A cracking branch behind me made me spin with a gasp, light flickering wildly to reveal darkness, and shadows and limbs shifting as if edged with mist, and eyes, countless pale eyes peering hungrily out at me from between the rotting boards and collapsing walls. Voices carried on the restless wind, the faintest, desperate whispers pleading, "Help us. Let us out." I broke then, dropping my backpack to flee blindly into the night. Branches tore at my clothes and face as I crashed through the undergrowth, my only thought to escape that cursed place and the things that stalked its ruins. Yet no matter how far or fast I ran, the trees never seemed to part before me, and that feeling of being hunted grew stronger with every frantic footfall. Panic clouded my mind until at last, exhaustion overtook me, and I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. As my vision swam and spots danced before my eyes, I remembered the old legends of this place, how any who strayed too deep were said to wander the forest in an endless loop, chased by the cursed souls who met their end.